Well, that too was not an insurmountable problem for our Machiavellian plotters. The same elected leaders in both houses of Congress and the same Mr. Woodrow Wilson, who signed the infamous Federal Reserve Act into law, amended the Constitution to make the federal income tax, known as the 16th Amendment, a law of the land. Both are illegal under our Constitution. In short, the same traitors signed both betrayals, the Federal Reserve Act and the 16th Amendment, into law. However, it seems that nobody ever realized that the 16th Amendment was set up to rob, and I do mean rob, the people of their earnings via the income tax provision. The plotters didn't fully use the provision until World War II, when that great humanitarian, Franklin Roosevelt, applied a 20% withholding tax on all small wage earners and up to 90% on higher incomes. Oh, of course, he faithfully promised that it would be only for the duration of the war, but what was a promise to such a charlatan who in 1940, when he was running for his third term, kept proclaiming, I say again and again and again, that I will never send American boys to fight on foreign soil. Remember, he was proclaiming that statement even as he was already preparing to plunge us into World War II by enticing the Japanese into that sneak attack on Pearl Harbor to furnish him with his excuse. And before I forget, let me remind you that another charlatan named Woodrow Wilson used exactly that same campaign slogan in 1916. His slogan was, "Re-elect the man who will keep your sons out of the war," exactly the same formula, exactly the same promises. But wait, as Al Jolson used to say, you ain't heard nothin' yet. That 16th Amendment income tax trap was intended to confiscate and rob the earnings of the common herd, you and me. It was not intended to even touch the huge incomes of the Illuminati gang, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the Lehmans, and all the other conspirators. So together, with that 16th Amendment, they created what they called the tax-free foundations that would enable the conspirators to transform their huge wealth into such so-called foundations and avoid payment of virtually all income taxes. The excuse for it was that the earnings of those tax-free foundations would be devoted to humanitarian philanthropy. So we now have the several Rockefeller Foundations, the Carnegie Endowment Fund, the Ford Foundation, the Mellon Foundation, and hundreds of similar tax-free foundations. And what kind of philanthropy do these foundations support? Well, they finance all the civil rights groups and conservation movements that are creating all the chaos and rioting all over the country. They finance the Martin Luther Kings. The Ford Foundation finances the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions in Santa Barbara, commonly referred to as Moscow West, and which is headed by Wonderboy Hutchins, Walter Ruther, Erwin Canham and others of that ilk. In short, the tax-free foundations financed those who are doing the job for the Illuminati's great conspiracy. And what are the hundreds of billions of dollars they confiscate every year from the earnings of the common herd, you and me, used for? Well, for one thing, there is the foreign aid gimmick which gave billions to communist Tito plus gifts of hundreds of jet planes, many of which were turned over to Castro, plus the costs of training communist pilots, so that they can better shoot down our planes. Billions to Red Poland. Billions to India. Billions to Sukarno. Billions to other enemies of the United States. That's what that treasonous railroaded 16th Amendment has done to our nation and to the American people, to you and to me, to your children and their children. If our Illuminati-controlled federal government can grant tax-free status to all foundations and pro-Red One World outfits, such as the Fund for the Republic. But if your patriotic pro-organization is too outspokenly pro-American, they can terrify and intimidate you by finding a misplaced comma in your income tax report and by threatening you with penalties, fines, and even prison. Future historians will wonder how the American people could have been so naive and stupid as to have permitted such audacious brazen acts of treason as the Federal Reserve Act and the 16th Amendment. Well, they were not naive and they were not stupid. The answer is, they trusted the men they elected to safeguard our country and our people, and they just didn't have even an inkling about either betrayal, until after each one had been accomplished. It was the Illuminati-controlled mass communications media that has kept and is keeping our people naive and stupid and unaware of the treason being committed. Now the great question is, when will the people wake up and do to our traitors of today what George Washington and our founding fathers would have done to Benedict Arnold? Actually, Benedict Arnold was a petty traitor compared to our present traitors in Washington, D.C. Now let's go back to the events that followed the rape of our Constitution by the passage of the Federal Reserve Act and the 16th Amendment. Was Wilson completely under their control? The masterminds of the Great Conspiracy put in motion their next and what they hoped would be their final steps to achieve their one world government. The first of those steps was to be World War I. Why war? Simple, the only excuse for a one world government was that it will supposedly ensure peace. The only thing that can make people cry for peace is war. War brings chaos, destruction, exhaustion, to the winner as well as to the loser. It brings economic ruin to both. Most important, it destroys the flower of the young manhood of both. To the saddened and heartbroken oldsters, the mothers and fathers who are left with nothing but memories of their beloved sons, peace becomes worth any price, and that is the emotion upon which the conspirators depend for the success of their satanic plot. Throughout the 19th century, from 1814 to 1914, the world, as a whole, was at peace. Such wars as the Franco-Prussian, our own Civil War, the Russo-Japanese War, were what might be termed local disturbances that did not affect the rest of the world. All the great nations were prosperous and the people were staunchly nationalistic and fiercely proud of their sovereignties. It was utterly unthinkable that the French and the German peoples would be willing to live under a one-world government, or the Turks and the Russians, the Chinese, or the Japanese. Even more unthinkable is that a Kaiser Wilhelm or a Franz Joseph or a Tsar Nicholas or any monarch would willingly and meekly surrender his throne to a one-world government. But bear in mind that the peoples in all nations are the real power, and war the only thing that could make the peoples yearn and clamor for peace, ensuring a one-world government. But it would have to be a frightful and horribly devastating war. It could not be just a local disturbing war between just two nations, it would have to be a world war. No major nation must be left untouched by the horrors and devastation of such a war. The cry for peace must be made universal. There were more lives lost in the Great War, the First World War, than in any other war in history. For instance, more men were slaughtered in one battle during the First World War, the left square bracket so-called right square bracket war to end all wars, left square bracket. And why was that exact phrase coined right square bracket than in the whole of the Second World War?